Welcome to the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alan Kornhauser. Hi, Alan.
Hey, good morning, Fred. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Our guests today are Cade Metz, New York Times reporter and author of the new book, Genius Makers, the Mavericks Who Brought AI to Google, Facebook, and the World. Thanks for joining us, Cade.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So nice to have you, Cade. Really an honor for us.
And Ken Pyle, managing editor of Vioti View and Vioti TV. Good to see you again, Ken.
Good morning, all, and I'm looking forward to reading the book.
Me too. Sorry, Cade. I need to read it.
I've waded into it a bit already, but it's great stuff.
Yeah, the first chapter is very engaging.
Ken,
good to hear.
Ken, you're based in San Jose and so involved in transportation there, and the community, I'm sure, is in shock at the horrific mass shooting at the light rail yard yesterday. Wanted to get into that just a little bit first. 9 people killed, co-workers of the gunman who took his own life. There's not much you can say almost.
It doesn't make sense. I'm somewhat familiar with that area. I used to live about a half mile from there, and just my heart goes out to all the victims and their families and friends. It shouldn't happen.
Right. Our condolences to all of those who were affected.
Same here.
Well, Cade, we want to turn to you. First, congratulations on Genius Makers, the Mavericks Who Brought AI to Google, Facebook, and the World. The #1 new release in the computer and technology biographies category on Amazon. Congrats there.
Thank you.
And we're going to come back to that, but we're leading off with your piece published in the New York Times this week, headlined, "The Costly Pursuit of Self-Driving Cars Continues On and On and On." And you start out talking about distractions that have caused problems for driverless cars, different kinds of distractions than we human drivers face.
Yeah, I mean, it's a moment for the self-driving car industry that we felt needed to be documented. There's been so much hype in this area over more than a decade, and I've felt for a long time that hype really gave the average person a skewed view of what was really going on. This is an incredibly hard thing to do, and I feel like that even some people in the industry don't realize how hard it is, and how difficult it may be to make these types of cars commonplace. Meanwhile, over this decade, tens of billions of dollars have been spent. And recently, as sort of that hype meets the reality, right, the physics of the everyday world, we've seen a real consolidation. Uber and Lyft offloaded their self-driving car units, the units that were actively working to build this technology. They've got other things to deal with during the pandemic and just trying to get their bottom line in order. 3 prominent startups have sold themselves to players with much deeper pockets. So you're seeing this whole industry consolidate around basically the big tech companies, the big car makers, a few other players who have just the massive amounts of money and talent and wherewithal that are needed to really get this on the road.
Well, when we talk about where we are today, the assessment that you're making here, what's the summation here? What do you tell your readers, the public?
Well, let's start with this service that Google has actually launched in Arizona. That's gotten a lot of attention in various places. Waymo, which is a spinoff of the Google self-driving car project. Last year, they announced that they officially launched this fully self-driving service, as they call it, in the suburbs of Phoenix. And I've, been down there and spent some time, reporting stories in and around this service that they were building. even that was delayed for years. They said that was going to happen in 2017. It didn't happen. It stretched all the way, to last year. Even then, people need to understand that the roads in suburban Phoenix are very different than the roads elsewhere in the country in a lot of ways, right? That the roads are wide. There are a few pedestrians. The weather is good. There's very little rain and snow, if any. The conditions are perfect for that sort of thing. The other thing you have to realize is that this is a relatively small area that Google has spent years mapping and remapping and honing the technology for that particular location. And that's what the technology requires today. You need this, just like detailed understanding of that particular environment. Technology doesn't necessarily translate instantly to other places in the world. You're going to have to do that same sort of mapping and that same sort of testing in other places. We don't have a technology that you can instantly put into the real world and have it work. People love to talk about artificial intelligence and the gains of the past few years, and there have been gains that we can talk about. But putting technology into the physical world is just inordinately difficult, right? The world is chaotic. It's full of uncertainty. We as humans deal with that chaos, that uncertainty by second nature. That's how we're built. You put a machine into that uncertainty, that's a very, very different prospect. Systems are good at dealing with what they've seen before, but not with what they haven't seen. And that's the gap, right? You can put someone in a self-driving car. It can take them, on a route that's expected. But once you get into what they call those edge cases, that the system hasn't seen before, that don't come up that often, that's what we're still trying to deal with. And that can take years, if not decades, to really smooth out all those edge cases.
So, Cade, what I found was really valuable of what you did with your article in the New York Times. And since I get the New York Times delivered every morning, and so when I had my coffee, what was it, yesterday or whenever it hit in the paper, my goodness, then my phone starts ringing off the hook or whatever. But I think it's really important that you bring out all those things, because of course there has been this enormous hype on this, and in some sense, I blame it on, I don't blame it on Waymo. I blame it on a look at the market. The question is, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to, do some great technological thing that in fact you'll show works, and then you'll stick it up on, some bookshelf someplace and get tenure at Princeton or something? Who cares? Okay. I mean, the issue is that what are they trying to do? I've argued that I think it's great that Waymo is in Chandler doing the easy thing. And I sort of tell my students, otherwise, GM at one point thought that they'd be Frank Sinatra and go into Manhattan. I think they lasted there, 12 seconds or something like that. I mean, you couldn't, they came out, we're going to do this in Manhattan. They said, oh, no, you don't. I mean, they were out. I mean, it'd be great if you can do it for the hardest case, and you can be Frank Sinatra, and therefore you can do it anywhere. Okay, great, wonderful. But this is tough, and you better start doing it someplace. And in some sense, I applaud Waymo for being in Chandler, and I applaud them for being careful. Okay, if there's one thing that maybe Uber didn't do, is they got a little bit ahead of themselves. And what'd that do? Oh my goodness, they were disregarding stationary objects ahead that they saw 6 seconds before they hit them. I mean, come on, kids, and why this is ending up needing the deep pockets is you can't afford to have another incident like an incident. Elaine Hirschberg got killed. I mean, we can't do this. And so in a sense, all those that were out there, trying to do this, not necessarily on a shoestring, but trying to do it, oh my goodness, this is easy. It may be good that they're not there anymore, because they're not going to be able to deal with that. They may not be able to deal with that uncertainty. So that's really good. And I think, to me, the other one that's been missing is that in the beginning, and I blame the Society of Automotive Engineers, and I won't bring you in on that one, but they came out with these levels, and this level 5, we're going to be driverless everywhere, and the car company is going to sell me one of these things, and this thing's going to, like I say, sit outside my window like a little puppy dog and go get stuff for me and bring it back, or I can go send it to you and it will take you someplace, and putting all this stuff in our minds in the Sunday supplements. Yours didn't appear in the Sunday supplement. It appeared in the business section, and that's where it deserves to be. So the question is, what business are you in? Are you in the business of letting me take my hands off the wheel and feet off the pedals every once in a while, only in the places where I'm driving, where it's well mapped, the way GM has come out with their systems and in the CT6? Great. But don't think you can take me from the watering hole to my bedroom, and I can have another drink and because I have to be in there helping the damn thing.
Right.
Okay. So that's the one market, which is great for the auto industry. As I've said, it's more chrome and fins. Hey, sell us stuff. Great, wonderful. Put an EV in there too, whatever. Yeah, wonderful. I'm happy. The other is moving people. Okay. The other is, for those that don't necessarily want that, which is what I think Waymo is trying to do in Chandler. The problem is Chandler, is not the right market. It's not the business section. Why? Essentially, everybody in Chandler has at least 2 cars. You don't move to Chandler. You can't live in Chandler unless you have probably, look at the household auto ownership statistics, 2% of the households don't have cars. You go to Trenton, New Jersey, there are 70% of the households have 1 or less. You have 2 people who try to make $15 an hour to put enough food on their table to survive. They've got to have, they're going to probably different. Who's providing them with the mobility to do that? And, that's, to me, where I think the business case for this and the societal case, social case, the social value case of this thing is. And unfortunately, I don't know, not enough in the industry. They're out there trying to do it in Chandler. It's a toy to Chandlerian. What's the right way to say that? Chandlerians?
Right. I don't know, but you've underlined the point that that I wanted to make there. Right. They are there for technical reasons. Yes. They're not there for business reasons.
Right.
And you're right. In these areas where a ride hailing service that is autonomous could help, the technology is not there yet. And this argument that you discuss where people say, we make this work in these really difficult scenarios like a New York or a San Francisco where Waymo is now testing. You see them all the time. Cruise, which is, a venture from GM, they're testing. Right. That's their argument, particularly GM. They love to say that once we get it working there, it's so difficult, then it will spread. That's not necessarily true. Again, this is going to spread to very particular geographies slowly. That's what we're going to see. The rollout is going to be over decades, and it's not going to be, the thing suddenly starts to work and then it's everywhere.
Yeah, well, that doesn't happen in anything. Even these things didn't get everywhere instantaneously, right? I mean, there was Nokia out there with the little and whatever with the flip phony, and I mean, and then finally and then and I always like to point to Frank Sprague with the electric trolley. Okay, there are like 74 attempts to do electric trolley in the 1880s or something like that, and he finally shows up in Richmond and makes it work. And all of a sudden, because it works, and what it meant is that it was good enough to beat the horse and buggy, to have a market associated with it, to actually have people say, hey, it's not perfect and stuff, but holy hell, it's good enough for it's better than what I have. To make it better than what the people in Chandler have, man, that's also tough, because they have those 2-car whatever out there just waiting. Whereas in places, as I like to argue, in places like Trenton, New Jersey, you have a lot of folks who, the way they can get there is by walking. They really, or wait for New Jersey Transit bus. I'm not allowed to say anything bad about New Jersey's transit, so excuse me a little bit. But I mean, yeah, it's a half-hour service just going to certain places, and heaven forbid you need to go at 2:00 in the morning. I mean, you're done. Hey, a good thing Uber and Lyft are out there that I'll spend the dinner money on them because I need to go there. And that's a where these things could be out there. Hey, if they do it, at least that's what I try to focus on, is making it affordable for folks who don't, and that's where we should work to make this work.
Well, you're right, but we're not there yet.
We're not.
Right. And the other point that I want to make that may help people understand why you get these promises that are not kept, right? We were promised these cars by 2019, and then 2020 and 2021. They're not here, obviously. The way that Silicon Valley works is you make promises like that because you have to. That's the way that you attract the money and you attract the talent. And that's why there's that level of hype. That's why things get so out of whack. And we're still in that stage where that's what these companies have to do. They've got to continue to attract these enormous amounts of money to get the technology working. And, I think that that's something that people who aren't immersed in this very different world out here in Silicon Valley, where I live, and, where I'm running around constantly looking for stories, the mindset is so different. They're not thinking about Trenton, New Jersey, and how they can help these people get around. They're thinking about, how can I raise the funds and attract the people to make this technology work someday? And this is what I have to do. I have to overpromise at the moment. Some people, are conscious of that. Some people do it unconsciously, but that's the mindset.
How do we change that? Or how do we educate? I mean, a lot of them are my students coming out of Princeton. Damn it. We should be educating them better. Okay. Well, I mean, we should, talk to me here.
It's hard, right? So someone like Elon Musk has such a megaphone, and this is the way he talks, and people take it at face value. What I do think we need to do is talk like we're talking now, write stories like I published this week, and really look at the reality of things. Otherwise, in the long term, you're really doing a disservice to people for many reasons. You talked about the dangers of this, but overinflated expectations can cause economic problems. We need to, the best we can, stick with reality. It's becoming harder and harder for us as a society to do. But we really do need to do that, and that's why at the times we think our role is important is to, as Elon Musk is saying these things, he's promised fully self-driving, as he calls it, since 2015, right?
Yeah.
It's always a year or two away. And we need to step back from these claims and really talk about what's going on.
Going to disappoint a lot of people who put up $10,000.
Yeah.
Exactly. Do you guys get a sense? Do you talk to people about that? Like how many people have ordered that and paid that money?
Well, I guess they have, but I guess, my view of it, maybe it's worth $10,000. Maybe he doesn't have to hype it. It is kind of nice at times to be able to take your hands off the wheel, feet off the brakes, and have it do it for you when the thing in the places where it really works, where you're not in the corner cases or the probability that something is going to happen. I mean, these things can see out in front of them. They can, as we drive, see where it's easy. If we're paying attention, we know when it's hard. We sit there and we intensely watch it. Now we get ourselves in trouble when, we don't intensely watch when it's hard, and that's where we get in trouble. But
right, but there's two things going on here, right? And you alluded to this before. There are systems like autopilot on Tesla, which are designed for highway driving, keep you in the lane. They can do lane change, that kind of thing. That if there's a car in front of you, they can stop. That's one thing. And then you had this other thing that's being promised, fully self-driving. Okay.
Yeah.
That is something very, very different that we do not have yet. And so there's that gap, and people conflate the two in their minds. And I understand that. It's hard. It's hard to wrap your head around what is really going on.
Right. I mean, when he came out with Smart Summon, I immediately called it Stupid Summon. I mean, okay, it comes out of my driveway or it comes out of my garage, and that's kind of nice because I have a tight garage. Then what am I going to do with it? I'm going to say, hey, it can go over to your house across the street, or I can be in a Costco and it can come get my groceries. And it can't do those things, okay? And probably if you go to the damn fine print, it says, you're only allowed to do this on your own property. Costco would go nuts. They have to get insurance to be able to protect against me with my stupid summons, whatever. And yeah, exactly the point you're trying to make. I mean, you have the megaphone, you have the opportunity there at the New York Times to really just say, look, let's try to understand the real value. There is potentially real value in this technology. One, it makes it much more comfortable, easy, and if I sort of misbehave in using my car, it comes out and it bails me out. That may be worth $10,000, okay? The other one is it can take me from the watering hole to my home the whole way. It can take me to a job, a $15 an hour job at the Amazon distribution center that, of course, New Jersey Transit doesn't serve because it's out next to the New Jersey Turnpike in what used to be a cornfield. Of course, it doesn't go there. These are fundamentally valuable propositions out of this technology. And unfortunately, they're not being presented except for you. I mean, and that's why we so appreciate.
Part of what is, going on in my story is that the industry slowly is starting to talk in more realistic terms. There's a guy quoted in my story. His name is Chris Urmson.
Of course, I love Chris.
He's a great guy. I like Chris a lot.
Absolutely.
And as part of that Silicon Valley hype cycle, at one point he said, his children would never have a driver's license, right? And now in my story, he's saying this is a transformation. This is it's gonna happen over the course of 30 years or longer. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you'll see these small pockets, might be geographic pockets where this is rolled out, or it might be, particular types of vehicles. Right. Chris, is focused after years of talking about the type of ride hailing service we've been discussing in Arizona. He's now shifted towards long haul trucks, which he sees, as in some ways an easier problem to deal with. Right. It may not be as easy as he lets on, and as some people think. That is incredibly difficult as well, even that sort of driving, just because these trucks are so large And because they do deal with that uncertainty and chaos just like a car in an urban area.
But the thing that Chris is developing, which can be really valuable to the Class 8s and the long haul truckers, is to improve the working condition of those poor truckers. I mean, I call them poor truck. Can you? I mean, I can't imagine having to pay attention to two white lines for 10 hours a day to feed my family. Okay, I mean, so you let the system be there helping this person, letting that person relax a little bit, maybe also allowing that person to get another hour of service out of there so that they can feed their family better, not to necessarily pull them out. The stuff that's in the truck behind me is a very valuable commodity. The person that's having that haul probably would appreciate having someone look over it comfortably, whatever, maybe be doing also a little something else or whatever during that time. But having, so to me, Chris's technology can almost go in and do that part of it. And every fleet owner, manager, whatever should be buying that stuff. You know, it costs them at least 10, if not 15,000 bucks per truck per year, you know, in liability charges. Okay, and who knows about the wear and tear on the poor employee that you have in there doing this. OSHA should be in there, you know, saying, look, I mean, this is worse than the meatpacking industry, or I don't know which is that.
The truck drivers aren't easy to find today, from what I
That's
understand.
another great point, right?
And that's the other great. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go.
Yeah, I mean, and that's actually what I mean. Chris is working towards taking the driver out of there, right? And that's going to take some time, but and Fred, you know, and that is a real issue that people may not understand, is that the number of truck drivers is shrinking as we need more and more of them, right? All you have to do is see these Amazon trucks, you know, speeding down the highway everywhere to realize that there's demand there, and at the same time, it's hard to meet that demand with the drivers. And so that's sort of the dream, and it still is a dream, is that we're gonna get these self-driving trucks. Now we'll see what happens.
But if we make that job a nicer job, a better paying job, because you can actually productively do another hour of service and so on, and it's not so stressful on your fundamental life and doing it, maybe more people would want to do it. You know,
you think in very practical ways and speak in very practical ways. You clearly do not live in Silicon Valley.
I do not.
Cade, let me ask you this. You've been talking about Ken's pretty close. Cade, let me ask you this, Cade. You've been talking about Amazon. What role might Amazon wind up playing here, and that other A company, the little one called Apple?
Right. Well, Amazon is an interesting case. I mentioned 3 big startups being acquired recently. So over the past year, one self-driving truck company was acquired. We've seen another acquisition just recently, but the big one was this company Zoox, which is doing more of a car. More of a personal vehicle intended for kind of the ride hailing setup. They were acquired by Amazon. It was a little bit strange, at the moment, because, ultimately, the big use case for Amazon are the trucks, right? And certainly, they're going to be moving in that direction at some point, but they acquired this company that's doing more of the ride hailing thing. And it moved into kind of their, the consumer end of their business. So, we'll see what they're going to do with that. But I think ultimately that's where the real value would be for Amazon. I mean, that's, I've always said that's the real strength of Amazon is this transportation network that they've built, right? When it comes to these trucks and the vans that you see now delivering packages, airplanes, they're of course working on drones for delivery. That's another thing we haven't talked about is, these types of technologies can be used for that last mile delivery, as they say. That's also an enormously hard problem. But all those things, play into Amazon's core business, and that's going to be of interest for them. They also, I will say, last thing on Amazon, they do take a more practical and realistic view of this stuff than some of these other companies. They don't make these public claims. They do, take those claims with a grain of salt, and they keep quiet while working on this type of stuff.
Yeah, they don't have to tell anybody because they're doing it for their own account.
Right.
They've justified it internally. I don't know. They might be hyping it internally for all we know to be able to get the proper allocations of whatever is to make those things happen. But the way I took the Zoox case, I just thought it was brilliant. And the brilliance to me is if you really want to do the driverless piece in neighborhoods, when do you want to do it? Between midnight and 5 a.m. There are no kids in the street chasing balls. There are no bicyclists, give or take. There's nobody else using it. The infrastructure for your mobility system is free. When can they deliver stuff to my front door? Of course, I'm a Silicon Valley guy. I need it in 2 minutes, okay? Maybe for 50% of my home deliveries, it has to be in 2 minutes, 2 hours, whatever, right. Silicon Valley type. For the other 50%, next morning, I'm right. Like the happiest camper in the world.
There you go.
Now you take your Rivian electric, whatever that you decided to buy a bunch of, right. And you take Chris Urmson's stuff and you put it, or Zoox stuff, right. And you put it on top of it. Now, out of the Robbinsville distribution center over here, half of your stuff can be delivered to Princeton, etc. Between
absolutely, but
whatever. It's right. Free. It's almost free. It's not just free shipping. It almost comes. I don't have to manage a person. I don't have to do whatever. I probably have to put a box out front I have to deal with some of that stuff. But right. I don't know. Talk to me here, Cade.
Well, I like that you bring this up because this is another area that might seem easy, and you're right. The business, the business case makes sense, but it is also incredibly difficult. For anyone who's been watching, NBA basketball recently, you now see these ads constantly for Domino's Pizza, they've got a new deal with this self-driving company called Neuro. The president, Dave Fergus, is another guy I know well and really like. He used to work with Chris Urmson on the Google self-driving car project. And this is what he's doing, his last mile delivery. You watch these TV ads and it looks like these robotic cars are everywhere delivering pizzas. They're in this tiny neighborhood in Houston. It's unclear if these robotic cars are supported by spotter cars, right, who are going to deal with any problems that arise. And
I hope they are, in case a problem arises.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah,
right.
I mean,
but I'm just saying the reality is very different from the commercials. And then, even if you get the technology to the point where you can expand it into larger areas, it might work okay if you're delivering groceries. Someone comes out of the house, they grab the groceries, they grab the pizza. The Amazon case, who's going to take the stuff out of the car, right, and walk it up the steps? Is that automated? That's an entirely different task. There's so many of these problems to be dealt with.
The last 50 feet end up being the challenge there. Now, whether or not we have a different kind of mailbox, Amazon box, I don't know. But and there are some folks working on those other ancillaries. My only point with respect to between midnight and 5 a.m. we have all this enormous infrastructure that we've built, the roads, spent, I don't know, talk about money being spent, we've spent it. It is essentially dormant between those times. And one would, I don't know, there are opportunities there when it is, some might suggest, I suggest, substantially easier to be able to do this thing there. Again, trying to find the Chandler of this thing as opposed to the Manhattan of this thing, you know, and the Frank Sinatra of this thing, you know, to start delivering some value.
Right.
And certain, yeah.
You're right. And absolutely. But the point I want to keep underlining is even in those areas where everything seems to make the most sense and it seems the easiest, the unexpected can come up. And this is a small anecdote, but I think it's illustrative. Neuro, that company I was talking about that does that last mile delivery, they are also, or they were at one point, they were also in the same area of Arizona where Waymo's testing. And I went down there to do a story on them. You know, they have they're like half-size cars, no driver in it, right? And they just deliver the groceries or the pizza, or whatever else. So, you know, I'm taking a look at these. I arranged for it to make a delivery to a home, you know, not that far from a grocery store in the area, right? It's just sort of a test case. But I wanted to walk through the whole process. The robot car arrives, you know, these doors pop up like this. And I lean down to take the groceries out. And I'm about 6'2". So, you know, I'm tall, I'm not super tall. Bang my head on the door, right? So anyone who's going to do this, who's my height, that's what's going to happen.
They did this with a New York Times reporter. I mean, this must have been the worst day in their life.
Well, what it shows is there are these little things in the real world that are unexpected. By the way, the new version no longer has that problem. They redesigned the doors, right? And that's just one like tiny thing, right? But there are so many tiny things. Yeah. I allude to it in the story I published in the Times this week, but for years, this is fascinating to me. Waymo's cars, their brakes would get twitchy in the spring. They didn't realize this until one spring when it was noticeable, and somebody figured out that every spring, when the leaves grow a little bit longer on the trees, the grass grows longer, the vegetation is sort of spilling out, into the field of view of the cars, the brakes would get twitchy, right? Again, that's a small, strange thing, but it's unexpected. They had to adjust for that, right? Make sure the brakes don't get twitchy when the grass is longer. We talk about long haul trucking, and it would seem easier to go down a highway. The problem Waymo ran into is what happens when there's construction. They get those road flares, and how do you recognize all that stuff, much less respond to it. There's so many other just tiny things that have to be done.
Yeah, in the trucking, to try to help a trucker, I'm not a professional driver, but if they have to pass somebody, they basically accelerate behind them and then scoot around. Okay. Probably, whatever time the collision computation that goes on in there with these things probably says, oh my goodness, I better start applying the brakes. So it won't really let them do, which if you're a professional driver, you're in control there. You've looked, you can swerve, you intend to swerve, you assume your steering wheel is going to turn and all that stuff. But whether or not now the system you have to make the system smart enough to realize that is what is going on, so you don't go in there and intervene in those kind of processes. Even if you're doing this, you're absolutely correct, and that's why I was so thrilled that you're bringing some of these things out. You have the opportunity to change the mindset on these things, and I think it's very important. We work on some of the Monday. Hey, we need good paint out there. The good paint that has that helps us drive better. But if the DOTs aren't willing to go out there and put good paint, I mean, this stuff isn't going to work. And we don't want, implants of whatever, of gizmos. How about stuff that works for us? And let's do a good job there. Yes.
Well, we have to break in just a minute, okay. But I know Ken has been wanting to jump in here, so I want to get him
No, I was just going to say two real quick things. The operational design domain is something you guys haven't talked too much about, and I liken it to kind of the cable franchise days. And the other thing, Alan, you kind of allude to this whole idea of 24/7 helping deliver packages, but it could also help for the mobility for the people who need mobility to get to those Amazon warehouse jobs at 2 a.m, right? Because there's no public transit operating at 2 a.m, for instance, right? So I think there's lots of opportunities and, to help in that regard.
Yep. And, and I think what Cade has been talking about is really the operational design domain, which is never, hopefully, those of us that deal with the technology piece of it, fully realize that. But the Sunday supplements that come out or the promos made to the investment community makes it seem like the operational design domain is, we want to make it so it can go through fog and deep snow. Come on, holy mackerel! Be able to operate in Arizona or and maybe Trenton next or someplace. Forget about. Hey, if there's fog, stop, okay? Don't be stupid. And if there's snow this deep, don't go. They close I-70 and don't let you go up to the Eisenhower Tunnel when there's snow that deep. Get real.
Right. In 1 minute, Cade, let me the other company I asked about, didn't get into, Apple. Do you have any sense of what they're laying people off and then they're hiring people to work on this stuff? What's going on?
Yeah, it's a strange thing. They've had on some level, a project for years and years and years, and you're right, you'll see it sort of ebb and flow. And they'll lay people off, then they'll sort of acquire the remains of a company. There's a company called Drive AI, which was doing some interesting work in this area. They ran out of money and for the most part, and kind of the remains of the company was acquired by Apple. We keep hearing stuff about projects, so they're keeping a toe in it, right? Again, I think that they're practical. They know that this is going to happen eventually, and it's something they want to make sure they at least keep an eye on. But they're not going full steam, it seems.
They're not going to pop out of a cake with a self-driving vehicle.
No one is. So that's the point here. Right? No one's going to pop out of the cake and suddenly they've got it and no one else does. Right? We're all dealing with the same laws of physics. Everyone is going to continue to work on this. You're going to see, I think, maybe in San Francisco, some services that are kind of like the one in Chandler, where the problem is constrained. They're in these very small areas that have been digitally mapped to death, right, so to speak. And then we'll expand there, and we'll see how it goes. And more years will pass, and we'll all come together, and we'll talk about like how a little bit has happened, but not as much as a lot of people said.
Well, we'll be back with more, but first, this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, read the white paper. It's called The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab. Some great information there to help you make informed decisions. ETFs, as you may know, can be a smart way to spread risk with investments and focus on a particular category of stocks. The site, once again, motoetf.com. We're back with more of the Smart Driving Cars podcast and our guests, Cade Metz and Ken Pyle. Cade, your new book, Genius Makers, the Mavericks Who Brought AI to Google, Facebook, and the World, takes a fascinating look at the origins of this technology. Maybe you can give our listeners and viewers kind of the quick synopsis, the little overview here.
Basically, there's a single idea that is driving a lot of the technological change and what people call artificial intelligence, right? We've had all this hype over the past decade. If you scrape away the hype, there are certain areas where the technology is really improving. The ability of the technology to recognize objects and images, right? So face recognition. You see this on Facebook, where the service can automatically recognize people's faces in the photos you post to the service, or digital assistants like Siri, where you can speak, commands, and it can recognize those commands. Translation services like Google Translate or Skype, which are getting so good at translating between languages. If you haven't used these recently, they are far, far better than they were just a few years ago. All of that and more is driven by the rise of this single idea. It's called a neural network. And it's essentially a system that can learn specific skills by analyzing vast amounts of data. So the idea I always give is, if you have a neural network and you feed it thousands of cat photos, it analyzes those photos and it looks for the patterns that define what a cat looks like. And in that way, it learns to recognize a cat. That same idea is what drives Siri and that speech recognition. You feed thousands of hours of spoken words into a neural network, and it identifies the patterns that identify those words. And that's how it learns to recognize what you say. Same thing with Google Translate. My book is about this small group of people who nurtured this, a very old idea. They nurtured this idea over decades. Most people thought it wouldn't work. And then suddenly about 10 years ago, it started to work. Basically,
now, you started out in the 50s, right?
Exactly. With this guy named Frank Rosenblatt, who actually gave an interview to my paper, the New York Times, about how this idea was going to, not only recognize, objects and images, but learn to speak for itself and build itself on an assembly line and do all these other things, fly into space and do who knows what. And, eventually, because there was such hype, we talk about how this goes on today. It went on in the 50s and 60s. There was so much hype, people lost faith in the idea, and it didn't do the things that they thought it would do. And, except for this tiny group of people, it was an idea that most did not believe in, even in the AI community. And it sort of ebbed and flowed, over the decades. There were moments in the 80s when people, had more hope that this would start working, and then it never did. About 10 years ago, we finally had the amount of data we needed and the amount of computer processing power we needed to analyze all that data that allowed this idea to work. And then, those people, who are at the heart of my book were suddenly sucked into the biggest companies on earth, right? Google and Facebook and Baidu in China and Microsoft. And my book is about these people who are incredibly interesting individuals, and about how they nurtured this idea, and then how once they arrived in industry, that the ideals that they personally harbored for this technology ran into the aims of these very large companies, who are driven by the profit motive, among other things. And so it's about the clash between these idealists and these companies. But it goes into all this stuff we've been talking about. This idea helps self-driving cars see the world around them, right? This is how a self-driving car recognizes pedestrians or street signs or lane markings. And there's hope that it can help self-driving cars better understand how to respond to that and make predictions. That's where it gets a bit more difficult. But this is why a self-driving car can identify what's going on around it.
What I've really liked about it, and why I've played in it and so on, is because its fundamentals seem to go to the fundamentals of what we have going on up here. If we really try to figure out how in the heck we take whatever, let's just take the eyes, comes into the eyes. I mean, if you go there through the structure of the retina and so on, holy hell! I mean, that's differentiating data. I mean, that's taking gradients and stuff and comparing it. And why is it so important that edges are so important? Because of that's what's taking place in damn retina. And then just a little bit of it gets passed down through the optic nerves, the back here of the visual cortex, and somehow the whole, and bringing those pieces together, and now realizing that the computational structure that you need for these things is non-trivial. The addressable memory that you have to have, because in some sense the dimensions of these things are so large, that all of a sudden, once it used to be thought to be NP complete. In other words, oh my goodness, we don't have enough to do it. Then all of a sudden, these darn, computing things all of a sudden could do it. NVIDIA shows up, or Silicon Graphics shows up, or the other folks show up. I mean, we can actually do. I mean, let's go play, and then and create it, and it seems to me, it's always seemed to me that there are fundamentals there that we should be able to get right, because we end up being able to do this, or my goodness, a flea flying around in my office here doesn't go crashing into the wall. How do they do collision avoidance? I mean, they have like two neurons. I say two, they have more than two neurons up there, but I mean, compared to what I have here to do, and I can't even go like that with it, because it knows. I mean, are you cut it out? What's going on with that computational machine that's in there doing that? And so, I think that's been inspiration for, as you found,
that's what you see in the book, is that this idea of a neural network. The reason it's called a neural network, is it's inspired by the way the brain is built, right?
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
meant to mimic the web of neurons in the brain, and that's the general idea. And by no means, we do not have systems that behave like the brain today. The brain is far too complex, even for us to understand how it works. We do not even know how it works yet. So duplicating that is quite a task, but that's the inspiration.
We have cicadas. We're being attacked by cicadas. The 17th year of the cicadas, and I'm sitting yesterday afternoon with my next door neighbor in the back. Maybe we might have had a glass of wine or something. We're wondering, how the hell do they know it's been 17 years? I mean, what the heck is going on there?
Right.
Okay. I mean, not 7. They're like in the ground and whatever. And so, I mean, so there's intelligence there that's going. I mean, it's a process that's leading to an output.
And you're right. It's a mysterious thing.
It is. And so how we do things in here. I mean, can you imagine in neurons, the synapse? I mean, it's not just on off. I mean, they're like frequencies and stuff and the do's. And I mean, you get in there and you go, holy hell. I mean, geez.
So people should remember that. When someone is claiming that artificial intelligence is here, and it's going to do X, Y, and Z, and you automatically, because I think it's because of decades of science fiction films and books, we hear that term. When people say artificial intelligence will do this, we automatically assume that it behaves like us, and it just doesn't. And it's inspired by what we do.
Absolutely.
But we don't understand the way our brain is able to do all the amazing things that it does. And so, the hope is that we can learn from the brain and build better machines. And maybe as we build, machines that behave more like the brain, that might give us a better understanding of the brain. So there's this sort of cyclical thing that these people in my book really believed in. And to a certain extent that happens, but we're still not to the point where we can duplicate that thing inside our head.
Well, Jan LeCun has been one of the people you've had at your Smart Driving Car Summit.
Yeah. Jan's been there, and
he is in the book.
He's in the book. Jan's great. Jan, I mean, in a sense, it's amazing the resources that he's been given at Facebook. I mean, Jan, what's he have, like, I don't know, 60 PhDs or 100 PhDs and whatever, and
Right.
not, you know, I mean, he's and they've made enormous progress, but you know, as we all realize, you know, some of the things that they would like to do with this thing, like, you know, figuring out what's truth in Facebook, you know, I mean, let's just start there. I mean, you
Right.
know,
Well, that's the thing, right? So this is this is a big part of the book, right? When what
Yeah.
I often say to people is that you and I, you know, it's often difficult for us to agree on, you know, what is true and what is not, right? It's difficult for us to agree on what is hate speech and what is not. And if we can't agree, how do we build a system that does that, right? So, you know, Mark Zuckerberg can sit before Congress and say, hey, we're going to deal with the hate speech problem or the fake news problem with AI. You know, that is an entirely different task, and a task that is more difficult than people think, because, you know, you can't even define the problem, right? Just because we humans cannot agree on such things.
Yeah, I think the other comment that I like to make to my students on this is that we're all different. Vive la différence. It's a good thing. You know, diversity is fundamentally great.
Yeah.
It just means that we're coming at things from different perspectives. And I know Jan talks about, you know, we all have worldviews. What the heck's our worldview? I guess since inception, you know, some stuff has gone in, and however this thing works has gotten stuff. And whenever we do anything, we sort of reflect it against that worldview. But because we all perceive different, it's all going to be different. Beautiful.
Right.
But we have to realize that, you know, that God, she defines truth, I guess. You know, I don't know, or, you know, we don't want to get into religion, please. I mean, but whatever. But
Ken, did you want to jump in here?
No, I was thinking, though, as I was ordering your book while you were talking about your book, I'm going to listen to it on Audible as soon as I finish the Ethereum book, which you mentioned Ethereum. That's also another good one about the history of Ethereum. But one of the things that just struck me going back to the earlier part of the conversation is we're living that vision of what people are talking about 25 years ago. Here we're on a Zoom call, interconnected. I'm ordering a book that you're talking about. So we got here, and it wasn't necessarily this linear path. And I kind of feel we're back, you know, with the self-driving or the driverless future. It's kind of that thing, right? There'll be something there, but how we get there is going to be kind of a rocky road, probably.
That's a really good point, right? It takes a long time, and we may have this idea of where things are going to go. It's not necessarily going to play out that way. And you see this time and again, you know, even with technology that's powerful, it's rapidly improving. You know, it can take a while to really get it out into the real world. And we've seen examples recently where things can happen very quickly in the digital world, right? On the internet, with a smartphone app. But that's very different than the physical world. Dealing with that chaos, like I said, is an entirely different prospect. And people need to remember that when you sort of apply that thinking from the internet world to the physical world. It's not that easy leap that it might seem to be.
How do we address that one? I mean, you.
Well, maybe we'll learn over time. Yeah, maybe we'll learn over time, because
yeah,
you know, we're starting to see, like I said in my story in the Times this week, the industry start to talk about this in a more realistic way. There are other industries that I'm starting to cover. There's this effort to build, you know, what they call flying cars, you know, essentially electric vehicles that can do vertical takeoff and landing. There's starting to be this hype around that area. And, you know, maybe as we keep getting into these areas that do have to deal with the physical world, that we're slowly going to realize this is a different prospect.
Terrific. Well, we want to thank our guests, Ken Pyle and Cade Metz. Cade's new book, once again, is Genius Makers, the Mavericks Who Brought AI to Google, Facebook, and the World. Thank you, Cade. Thank you, Ken.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Really great having you. Our pleasure, and keep doing what you're doing, and please, because you make a difference.
Thank you.
And thank you to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more information is available at motoetf.com. You can find us once again at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, wherever you get your podcasts. Get your smart speaker to play us too. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alan Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching, and please stay safe.
Thank you.